So, good morning. My name is Ben Bynett. I live in London and I work as a software developer. I'm currently the secretary of the Printing Historical Society. Originally, it was Dr. Rachel Stenner who planned to be here presenting a talk about the Virtual Museum of Printing project in the UK. Rachel is the chair of the National Printing Heritage and Committee, which is a part of the Printing Historical Society. She is also chair of the executive committee that is guiding what I'm going to call the VMT project. That's the Virtual Museum of Printing. There's a lot of long that's in it. Rachel is currently senior lecturer in English literature 1350 to 1660 at the University of Sussex. Her connection to printing history comes through examining how writers depicted the printing trade and how members of the trade depicted themselves in writing. Unfortunately, work commitments have prevented Rachel from attending the conference. I hope that she is able to attend in the future and provide more news of this project. But today, I'm very happy to be here instead. I do not have Rachel's knowledge of the project, so please forgive me for any errors of fact. I hope you find my talk interesting despite this. So, the conference connection. Print discovering its future is a topic that invites papers that also look forward. The title of this talk responds to that, Hopes and Facts. Of course, when considering the future, it is useful to look at the present. So in the first part of the talk, I will set the VMP project in its historical context and describe the current position. The Virtual Museum of Printing project looks forward to progress and perhaps one day completion, so I can address the hopes for the future too. In the second part of the talk, I will describe the nature of the museum and the aspirations of the project. But I'd first like to give some of my biography and show how I came to be presenting this talk. So what qualifies me to be here today? I'm currently Honorary Secretary of the Printing Historical Society. This means I do my best to arrange our meetings, compile an agenda, and take the minutes. I also get strange and interesting messages as my email address is the catch-all when people cannot find the appropriate person in the society to write to. I grew up in Oxford, a small and rather unusual city, about 1 hour from London. My family is very wordy. Perhaps this is made worse because my dad is a lexicographer, a person who writes dictionaries. I spent a lot of time drawing as a kid, including lots of lettering. Often I draw on the back of discarded galley proofs. These are long, thin strips of paper from the Oxford English Dictionary, which was hand set at the Oxford University Press. This is the 1980s, by the way. I was introduced to the letterpress process as a teenager. I met Claire Bolton of the Alembic Press and had enormous fun in the school holidays treadling an Arrow pattern press, foot, and learning to set type. Like so many before me, I was captured by the experience. The feel of each piece of type in the hand, the calm absorption of setting lines in the composing stick, the steady rhythm of printing, the achievement of a stack of printed copies, and the aesthetic satisfaction of the result. I studied for a degree at the Department of Typography at Reading University. The unique undergraduate course placed a lot of emphasis on the historical roots of graphic design. We made 2 European study trips. European in the UK means... In fact, one of them brought us here to Offenbach and the previous house, the Stadtgeschichte in 1998, also the Kingsbourg Museum. Following graduation, I became a freelance designer and turned more and more towards the possibilities of the World Wide Web. I was lucky enough to attend some of the annual conferences of the Association Typographique Internationale, and I met some of the true characters from the world of type design. At the same time, I started to support St Bride Printing Library in London as a volunteer. I helped to look after the library's website. The Friends of St Bride arranged many events and conferences at that time, and I did much of the conference tech support. This was a great way to meet more type, print, and design characters. I said when I wrote this, perhaps some are here today. I know there are people here today that I met in that world. You can just see on this slide On the left, we have an example of one of the boxes of punches that you'll find in St Bride Library. On the right, you can see Paul. I always forget his surname. He's a master calligrapher, absolutely amazing guy. You have to watch him sing as he draws letters. He chants like a monk and draws the letters, and it's amazing. And in the middle, a friend of mine, Helen, she's discussing the merits of an Albion printing press. That's actually all quite a long time ago those photos are taken. So, yes. I also helped to set up a letterpress workshop at the library. Just be careful when you do something like that. The library has a lot of stands in it, but yes. The conferences, events, and workshop represented a big change for St Bride. There were a significant increase in engagement with the graphic design community. St Bride Library was and is a crucial place in the spiritual world of typography, and I was lucky to be involved. I started Letterpress Workshop in my garden shed, and when I moved to London, the Platen Press gave way to a Van der Kuyk proofing press in my kitchen. So yes, I was talking about the aesthetic satisfaction, not the left. That's not very aesthetic, but that's more about me and why I'm here. So now let's look at the origins of the Virtual Museum of Printing. So in 2016, two printing heritage groups in the UK combined. If that hadn't happened, the VMP project would probably not be underway. These organisations were the Printing Historical Society and the National Printing Heritage Trust. To explain the origins of the VMP project, I'll give some history of each. So, Printing Historical Society. It was founded in 1964 by, amongst others, a librarian, James Moseley, an academic, Michael Twyman, and a journalist, James Moran. There were other founders. The librarian and the academic are still around today, and both of them have contributed significantly to the literature of printing history in English. Moseley spent his career at St Bride Printing Library, and Twyman founded the Department of Typography at Reading University, the place where I later studied. The interests of the founders included typography and the evolution, aesthetics, and practicalities of type design, the influence of graphic techniques such as etching and lithography on the appearance of published images, and the processes of print production, the development of its machinery, and the growth of its industry. The central aim of the society was the production of a journal, which the original committee decided should be printed in the best possible way. Perhaps it looks old-fashioned for its time, it's 1965, but then, of course, it was British, and it was produced by Oxford University Press. It's actually a very nice produced object, very, very restrained indeed. So, James Moseley's preface to the first number of the journal in 1965 set out the ambitions of the society and the scope of its interests. In his preface, Moseley noted the regrettable absence of a permanent home for the materials put together for printing and the mind of man, which was a large exhibition display printing equipment in the UK, in London, it might not be in London, in 1963. This was one of the motivating events that led to the PHS being founded. The professional concerns of people connected with the society often included the preservation of the physical artifacts of printing, and this can be explained by the fact that it is easier to understand the end products of it if you can study the tools that made them. Amongst the 7 essays in the first number of the journal were included The Garment Types of Christopher Plantin by Henrik Vervliet, and Académisme et Typographie, The Making of the Roman du Roi by André Jean, plus The Tinted Lithograph by Michael Twyman. These 3 all looked outside the United Kingdom, helping to establish the journal's inclusive tastes, and by extension the tastes of the PHS. In time, the society became a charity and recognised, in addition to publishing material from printing historians of all kinds, it could encourage them by offering grants to support their research. with the expectation that this support would lead to future articles. A grants programme was established. In recent years, this has awarded a total of between £2,000 and £4,000 to around 5 or 6 applicants a year. The money is intended to support research by paying some of the incidental costs such as travel and reproduction fees. And since 2020, a prize for new scholarship offers further encouragement to people who are entering this field of research. So what motivates people to get involved? The Society has always been entirely made up of volunteers, and all posts are honorary. In other words, the work involved is unpaid. The contributions that members make reflect their professional interests in fields such as academia, archives, and museums, or the antiquarian book trade, and their personal interests as book collectors, graphic designers, or hobby printers, for example. What they share is an interest in aspects of printing history and a desire to share and extend that interest into the future.
So in summary, the Printing Historical Society is an academically minded, independent group which studies aspects of the history of print. The Society fulfills its aims by publishing a journal. It seeks to nurture interest by offering grants that will support the kind of research which can be published in that journal. Society is based in the United Kingdom, but although it concentrates on Great Britain and Ireland, its outlook is international. So, National Printing Heritage Trust, even longer. The NPHT was started in 1990. I've searched in the PHS bulletin around this date for a mention of the NPHT's origin or an announcement of its foundation, but I have not discovered anything until 1992. Despite this, some of the people involved were prominent in the PHS at the time. Its chairman was Michael Twyman, also a PHS founder. The NPHT was a grant-giving organisation from the beginning. Its aims are laid out in this prospectus from around 1994. They are tightly concentrated on the techniques and equipment, in other words, the production aspects of printing. So, assisting museums to buy items related to printing, encouraging external projects to relocate, restore or preserve equipment and archives. If funds become available, purchasing or rental of premises where equipment can be stored and renovated, and if funds become available, financing wholly or partly a National Museum of Printing. These aims and the NPHT's foundation date of 1990 remind me of Alan Marshall's talk to this conference a year ago in Malherbe. The image on the screen behind him while he spoke, there he is, was a timeline showing the numbers of printing museums and collections established per year over a period from 1840 to 2022. It was an effective graphic. In the context of Atelier Musée de l'Imprimerie, our host for that event, the data seemed to offer a memento mori, a reminder that the trend to create printing museums is very much downwards. And these are, incidentally, this is letterpress at the top here, basically. But of course, AMI's existence challenges the idea that this decline is terminal. Today, I'd like to borrow the chart, and thank you, Alan, to offer a post-rationalization of the origins of the NPHT. And this is my personal interpretation of the situation. So as we saw, 25 years earlier, James Moseley had written of his regret that there was no permanent home for outdated printing equipment. But the PHS was concerned with publishing research rather than preservation. As the librarian at St Bride Printing Library, Moseley himself had rescued large amounts of printing equipment since the late 1950s, but it disappeared into the library. In truth, an archive, and was far out of sight of the public. Access to this collection depended on knowledge of the library and a visit to London. Its catalogue was not public. The situation around the country remained basically the same as it had been back then. Regional museums might display artifacts related to local printers, perhaps laid out to replicate a letterpress workshop. At the National Science Museum in South Kensington in London, there was a printing gallery. It's gone now, by the way. which featured a monotype caster on a rotating pedestal. But there was no National Museum for Printing. Alan Marshall's chart shows us that 1990 is in the peak of the period where new museums for printing were being established. So it's likely that the same factors which drove the creation of new museums worldwide were strongly influencing the desire for a national museum in the UK. The NPHT's prospectus leaflet shows us that unlike the PHS, it was actively supporting people in their efforts at preservation. It had given financial help as well as practical assistance to a number of museums. Although this would not help to save up for a future national museum, it was an investment that would encourage professionals in museums and archives and therefore perhaps inspire more interest from future generations. In 1997, the NPHT published its inventory of historic printing items held by museums in the United Kingdom. That's an even more snappy title, I think you'll agree. This document was issued again in 2000 as the Directory of Historic Printing Items held in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Tony Smith, who joined the NPHT's advisory committee in 1994, calls it a remarkable achievement, and NPHT's later publicity claimed that it sets a standard for similar publications in other subject fields. The publication of such a directory was a significant step beyond the original aims. Its intention was to open up all the collections of printing material around the UK and Ireland, greatly reducing the difficulty that individuals would have in carrying out research tasks. It is something we're constantly forgetting, but before the World Wide Web, the process of uncovering information was much more a matter of chance than of brute force. A letter asking for information, published in the PHS's newsletter, or later the bulletin, had to await the publication date up to 3 months away. It might go unanswered. Without online catalogues, archive inquiries were handled by staff case by case, rather than real time by the researcher. A directory would cut much of this time and allow inquiries to go straight to the appropriate person or organisation. In fact, as a more recent example of NPHT publicity from around 2000 reminds us, the internet was closing in fast. After describing the directory, this flyer states, "It is intended to update its contents and to make it accessible via the internet." The directory was converted to a spreadsheet database, but despite several attempts, it was never put online. This was a source of disappointment and frustration for those involved in collecting and processing the information. So, the Trust continued its independent existence for 25 years until 2016. In that year, faced with the resignation of the President and the Treasurer, and with a reduction in the number of trustees, it seemed inevitable that it would have to close. I mentioned that several of the people involved in founding the NPHT were also closely involved with the PHS. This was also true in 2016, so a decision was made to unite the two organisations. This meant the NPHT's work could continue without needing officers or trustees. The money it held was placed in a dedicated account by the PHS. So the new National Printing Heritage Committee kept the aims of the NPHT. Its dedicated fund allowed it to perform the same grant giving that it had when independent. Administration costs were reduced. At the time when the committee was formed, the core work of the Trust was listed as fundraising, grant giving, lobbying, promotional and record keeping. At the date that the NPHT and the PHS came together, the Trust's aim of financing wholly or partly a National Museum of Printing had not been realised. In fact, it seemed to be no closer than it had ever been. As mentioned, the NPHT directory was not up to date. No new editions had been published, despite intentions to do so. But in 2020, the committee's chair, Paul Nash, was able to report to the PHS's annual general meeting that although there was no immediate prospect of a national printing museum being established in bricks and mortar, i.e. an actual building, The NPHC is now considering a move towards its ultimate goal by helping to establish a virtual National Museum to allow museum curators and collectors to make their collections visible and comprehensible through a combined virtual display. This announcement marked the start of the Virtual Museum of Printing. Paul's quite modest report rather masks the ambition of the project, which in its own words will be a virtual museum collective with the objective to bring as much of the nation's printing historical resources as possible together in one virtual site. What had led to this new initiative? As Lee Hale, chair of the Virtual Museum of Printing's Executive Committee, told me, it is a story that takes us away from London. Lee is the head of Winterbourne House and Garden in Edgbaston, a leafy suburb of Birmingham, 2 hours away from the capital. Winterbourne is owned by the University of Birmingham. It served as the university's botanic garden and extramural department, that is the place you go to study courses if you're not a member of the university. And this connection with the community has been greatly expanded in the last 2 decades with informal short courses open to the public. Originally, these focused on gardening and craft. When a collection of printing equipment located in another university building nearby came under threat, Winterbourne gave it a new home and added printing subjects to the courses on offer. Another Birmingham initiative, the Centre for Printing History and Culture, came to adopt Winterbourne as a home. CPHC members included several people connected to the PHS and NPHC. In this atmosphere, where there was support for printing history and public engagement, an informal idea for a virtual museum of printing came to life. With such ambitious aims, the project goes beyond the capabilities of the NPHC acting alone. Instead, the Virtual Museum project draws on the resources of several project partners, rather than being solely the responsibility of the NPHC. The current partners are the PHS, the University of Sussex, the Centre for Printing History and Culture, Birmingham City University, the University of Birmingham, and Winterbourne House and Garden. Representatives of each of the partners agree on governance and finance, provide access to their own networks, and of course encourage one another. An increase in the interaction of groups who share an interest in the subject matter has its own immediate benefit for all of them. The VMP's project plan sees this network strengthening as a strategic goal of its own. The plan envisaged translating as far as possible the capabilities of a museum into a website. The NPHC itself has no collections, and so this museum would display items in collections held by other organisations around the UK. The contributors would select these items. The items would have interpretive text, as in a physical museum, giving their origin and explaining their significance. They might be scanned documents, photographs of artefacts, 3D models, or videos of processes. Just as a physical museum needs to support its visitors' interest and learning with coherent narratives, so this virtual museum should be coherent. Because of this, the selection of items might need to be curated by the VMP project rather than left to the contributors. The virtual museum was planned to be launched in stages, allowing experience at each stage to inform the next. An important task was to get the agreement of a number of suitable collections to contribute to the initial version. The project now has a list of around 20 collections that are substantial enough to be initial contributors. The original plan for the first launch was to use the material from these collections to form the museum's own initial display collection, and the success of this would be the spur to encourage more collaborators to join the project. Although it wasn't fully up to date, the NPHT's directory represented a source of information about possible collections to approach. As we know, updating the directory has been an ambition of the NPHT and the NPHC for many years. The directory can be seen now as an aspect of the virtual museum, a gazetteer derived from the content that has been contributed. Visitors searching for a particular artifact will see immediately which organisation holds it and can use this as the basis for making contact with them, just as the directory's creators envisaged. The virtual museum could also be seen as turning the directory into an immersive catalogue for all the contributing collections. In the project strategic plan, there is an aspiration to provide online interactive activities such as workshops and demonstrations, just as can be offered by physical museums. This will connect the project both to the professional side of printing and to the contemporary art and craft side, which is now sufficiently well established to have a history of its own. This is the museum's mission statement. The Virtual Museum of Printing seeks to celebrate, communicate, and share print history and culture by creating a digital platform for all collection holders, museums, and educational institutions that collect, preserve, and interpret objects and archival material relating to print history and cultures. It focuses on the production of works on paper, including texts, images, and other content that were printed or distributed in the United Kingdom and areas previously under English colonial control until 1850. The Virtual Museum of Printing aims to offer a high-quality visitor experience in a digital form and connect collection holders, including curatorial and academic staff, to each other. I think the VMP is a remarkable step for the Printing Historical Society to take, and this is for several reasons. Firstly, the need to build relationships with contributors. So as a publisher, rather than owner of its collections, the VMP must get each contributor's agreement to share their data with the project. The VMP project understands that it must build and nurture relationships with the custodians of each collection, because the selection and display of items will require careful collaboration to display and describe them rather than simply uploading files. Those contributors will need support to bring their holdings into the virtual museum. That means help in documenting the artifacts with photos, videos, or 3D models, along with copywriting and editorial assistance. And this work has to be fitted into budgets and timetables that are often not generous. Secondly, engaging with the public. So I'm speaking to an audience which is familiar with the demands of engaging with the public. But this is not something that the project's owner, the Printing Historical Society, has ever sought to do. Certainly, it has organised events, but participants will generally be well informed, having already gained specialist knowledge. Museums expect a very different audience. They welcome all comers, engage with all interested visitors, and seek to provide ways to explain why the treasures they hold are significant and special. When the directory was created, the National Printing Heritage Trust didn't need to worry about interpreting the collections. It was enough to share knowledge of their existence. The VMP will build considerably on the foundation provided by the directory. Writing or talking about anything for an audience that does not already have relevant knowledge takes extra effort. The project's strategic plan, selecting items that will inspire the public will require curatorial skill. The project's strategic plan discusses the importance of engaging with everybody, considering different backgrounds, experience, age groups, abilities, and interests. And then the third reason is resources. The Printing Historical Society is not a wealthy organisation, and it does not have a very large membership. Alone, it could not contemplate such a project. Again, I must apologise that I do not have details of the commitments made by the project partners, but my understanding is that they will contribute time and expertise in the early stages rather than providing funding or long-term support. The project must generate enough interest and excitement to gain significant financial support from external sources for its future ambitions. It must retain the engagement of the project partners so they can continue to guide it. It must find a way to carry out the background administrative tasks necessary to keep the project active. With good connections in the world of heritage funding, this may be an easier task than it would have been for a group built solely around the PHS and the NPHT. The initial vision for the museum was to exhibit items from each of the initial contributing collections with interpretive text giving their origins and explaining their significance. The VMP project got started around about the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, with all the upheaval that brought about. As we all know well, this disrupted work, disrupted spare time, disrupted budgets, and led people and organizations everywhere to see things differently. And alongside this, the practicalities of starting a project with involvement from several partners have pushed the launch date back around 18 months. So, to bring things up to date, as Rachel Stenner told me, the barriers in our way, capacity and finance, have helped to show us the approach to take. The first phase of this project is about building capacity and awareness so that we can go on to do more. What the project now proposes for the first launch is to publish a list of the contributing collection holders. Each collection holder will have a profile and a single sample object from their collections. The list of collections has value in its own right as a gazetteer, just as with the original directory. Publishing the list contributes to improving public access to the collections. When it launches, hopefully in autumn or winter 2023, the museum will acknowledge that it is at an early stage and share its vision of future stages. The first launch will give everyone a chance to find out more about the contributions that the VMP can make. The printing community on one side, the museums and archives on the other, have different needs and expectations, and the experience gained at this stage can be used to balance these. The project partners hope that the emergence of the museum will encourage more discussion between the two groups. The insights into what audiences most appreciate about it and most want to take from it will provide a good basis to consider the next stages in its development. The title of this conference is Print Rediscovering Its Future. If the VMP project goes well, then it could represent a rediscovery of interest in printing by the public. It will also be something new for the world of museums. Until recently, creating a museum with no holdings of its own and no physical presence would have seemed very, very, very strange. It directly challenges the idea of a museum as something anchored to a location, physically framing its collections and inheriting much from the qualities of its surroundings. The VMP will have no surroundings, as well as having no cafe and no weather outside. There will be no staff to welcome visitors and no tours with a guide. There will be instant access to any artifact, but no opportunity to smell or touch anything. The experience will take place in the realm of the mind and will not have physical resonance. But if the museum can add sufficient depth and context to the items it displays, it will still be an immersive experience. As we all know, the internet doesn't have opening hours, and it is easily possible to spend much more time than expected on a website that you just happen to visit. Behind the scenes, there could be gains for the community as project partners work together to bring the collections to the museum. So, this will be a very different kind of printing museum, but it could also be a very valuable contribution to the future of printing history. Thank you very much.
Oh, goodness. Very delicate situation. Lots of perspectives. And thanks very much for that brilliant talk. It's a real, I'm sure there are questions and remarks and please.
And then it has started so much here. There would be no welcome manager, there would be no guided tour. I don't think so. It's for fixed rock textiles out of that.
And then
So it's starting on the baby and that
has been secondly, you know,
about
destroying it.
but I think so little some and the English could contain any kind of content of virtual intelligence that could do this job. They should set a focus on any century or something like that. That's what really I learned to an obstacle to take.
I absolutely agree with that as a straightforward fact. Yes, a virtual museum could easily engage by having something like maybe a chat bot or just a really great video to get you started. I think what I would say though is that, as I hope is clear, this is very, very modest, and I know from my professional experience a little bit of the work that is involved to create a relatively modest website. To be ambitious is, I mean, it's a big deal. It's certainly money and a lot of time, and I don't currently know where that would come from. And I think it will be, as I implied, it will be for those first steps to demonstrate that there is interest, and then to encourage the partners to seek a way to provide the kind of thing that you've just talked about. And that really feels a long, long way away from the Printing Historical Society. I mean, that feels like another galaxy, to be blunt. Publishing a journal is not totally easy. Publishing a very nice quality journal with peer-reviewed information in it for 50 years is an achievement. But it's totally and utterly different from the kind of thing that you just described, where you are really working to convert people who are disinterested into people who are inspired. That's what a museum literally is. It's a place of the muses. You know, it hits you in the face. And personally, I would very much like that to happen. It's just a bit difficult to imagine it. So I think we dare to dream, but we need to remember that there's very, very modest support available at the start, and nobody will have any professional time to devote specifically to it unless they can carve that out by justifying what they're doing to other people. It won't, that won't be necessarily very easy for them to do, because it won't necessarily be an obvious part of their daily work as academics or whatever. So challenging. Sorry.
In fact, adding to the flow of information that is available is a good attempt, and systematically bringing together people. But what is available is already so much, and we have not to do anything with it. This artificial intelligence already built in the websites in the world. When you take one thing, monotypography, abundant information, little films on MyTube. In a whole afternoon, you can get all the information you need for the time being. So adding an overall covering inventory is, you should do it, but there is, and it is done by artificial intelligence inside the web world. It is done by Google or by Apple or Microsoft. They are competing, so the one is better than the other, but it's giving progress every day. So don't neglect that. Well, don't try to recast the world.
Very good point. Yes, I think the big distinction that we've now, I mean, when I was writing this talk, I obviously didn't have knowledge of what would be said over the last day or so, and it's been really great to hear some of the positive things about that, especially other efforts to collate information. A museum is I'm talking to people who are experts, and I'm not an expert, so forgive me, but a museum, to my understanding, is a very focused experience. It has boundaries, and those boundaries are deliberate because of the difficulty of trying to encompass the world. But it also offers the possibility, because of the structure of it, to speed up access to information, particularly if you don't really know what you're looking for. So you're right that the web, because of the technologies involved, will start to tune in the things you find. But it doesn't yet, not in 2023, it doesn't yet pop up a thing and go, well, I'm going to tell you everything that I, as the Google bot thing, I know about this because I'm going to introduce you to the world of printing history and show you. You still have to do that yourself. You still have to filter through the things you find, and you have to evaluate them, and the importance, the ranking in the search engine versus the significance to you. Google number one might be Gutenberg Museum, but that might be completely irrelevant to you. You might need to know about some tiny little place on an island, and the fact is that Google doesn't really know that. You still have to work at it. So there's room for a museum that can do that kind of work of basically taking your hand and helping you.
People don't know. There was a little girl sitting there already with iPad from then, and she knows already what she wants, and she can find everything. No, Mr. Scheu, we can't find everything. If I know my grandchildren find more than you can only find what is put in so far, but you can't find what people have an idea to have a new perspective, a new plan, a new identification with the Labasastic. And that is what a museum has to be. A museum is not an objective container of something. The museum is always run by persons, and it's a very, very good aiming for always new person and new groups of person to configure something which is a new aspect of the thing. So I definitely, if that wouldn't be the truth, I never ever had entered the museum.
I wonder whether there is some competition on visibility of participants on the website, especially if museums who are publicly orientated and want as many visitors as possible. Does this has any reflection on the way you work on the internet? Or there some some are striving not to have more visibility, or
I think I see where you're going. You remember I said that this was a sort of step-by-step approach. And if we go back to the origins of the project, they don't come from a museum and curating background. They come from an academic and an enthusiast background. And the realization of the idea of what a museum is quite important, and the fact that it's different. But the people involved still have to consider what that really means. And so step one is going to be, I think, quite neutral. And it will be a question of saying, here we are. Oh, by the way, you notice we changed the name. It's at BMOP, and now it's VMOP. It was British Museum of Printing originally. I'm glad it isn't that anymore, but we'll perhaps come to that. So we need to see how this new site is actually perceived, and what the contributors are prepared. What do they say? They may say, well, look, we're only prepared to show you stuff on X or Y because we actually would like people to come through you to visit us. And I just don't know how that's going to go. That will be a crystal ball job.
Because I assume you will soon will get a question, what's in it for me if I
Precisely. And so we obviously that question comes from everyone. The users of the museum want to know why the hell are they wasting their time on this thing? They could be watching, I don't know, pick your favorite junk thing on the internet, or they could be earnestly looking at reproductions of beautiful printed works or whatever it is. There's a competition going on there already. So we'll have to see. So that's one side. And then, of course, the contributors who are paying with time or possibly even with money also want to know. If the project goes out to the heritage sector in the UK, there is obviously a whole professional body of people who know how to extract money to support projects like this that are not self-supporting. are not going to allow us to walk in and, withdraw cash. It will be a question, what are you delivering for all of your, what we call in the UK, stakeholders? Literally a stake, it's something you plunge into a vampire to kill it. So it's a good word. But that will be a day of reckoning. That will be very interesting to see. It's really challenging for me to imagine that day, okay? Just to put it into context, it's really difficult to imagine that. I think this is my personal view, I think this is a brilliant and inspiring thing. And I remember asking Michael Twyman, when I was a student at university, I asked Michael Twyman, who was the chairman of the NPHT, do you think, Michael, that there will ever be a national physical, at that time, a museum of printing in the UK? And he said, no. Basically, he just sort of laughed it off. And that's really kind of sad because he was the chairman and that was their goal. And he didn't believe it. We do have museums of printing, but there's nothing on the national level. There's nothing that can pull the story together and make it work. There's nothing like the Gutenberg Museum, Whether it's actually necessary, I think I'm allowed to question that because I never signed up and said that there should be such a museum. What it would represent, though, a national museum represents something, it tells the nation that it should be interested. It says to the nation, this is something that you should consider as part of your shared history. And again, that's an interesting statement. The UK, the U in United Kingdom is starting to look a bit interesting. And there are different ideas about what constitutes nationhood. But still, I think you can definitely argue for it. So if there are other questions right now, I would just like to say again how much I'm really excited by some of the things that I heard about attempts to collect information together. And this project is bounded by the UK. And I think that's correct because otherwise, where do you draw the line? It's ironic because the internet doesn't have boundaries, but nonetheless, I think it's appropriate. I have no insight into the data that I'm pointing at, it's in here. I've no insight into the data that's actually going to be gathered by this project, okay? So just think about that. If anyone involved actually does know, that's also interesting. So what I'm saying is it has no shape, it has no form. The directory, I have actually managed to get hold of a copy of the directory, and it's a spreadsheet, okay? It is not a big sort of vibrating machine full of data. It's very, very simple. But other people are collecting information that looks very similar. And we really do need to avoid duplicating and clashing that kind of information. We need to avoid going crazy collecting it because that's quite grueling. And if it doesn't work out, like the directory project, people got very sad because they put a lot of effort into it, phoning people up, writing letters, copying stuff down, looking for errors in it, and they did all this in their free time. So I don't want to put anyone through that for no reason, but I would like to hear that if there is an opportunity to collate and to use the same taxonomy, the same schema in collecting information, other projects are doing it. It seems to me this organization is definitely at the forefront of that and should be thinking about whether it can afford the time and effort required to look after it. Perhaps that's my sort of parting remark on this subject. I think we should give it a try.